Hello, everyone, and welcome to Really Old Movies. I'm your host, Harrison Scullin, and today I'll be discussing Sunset Boulevard from 1950, starring Gloria Swanson, William Holden, and directed by Billy Wilder. And so now let me get into some behind-the-scenes details. So from the film's IMDb page, when Norma Desmond says to the guard at the Paramount Studio gate, "Without me, there wouldn't be a Paramount Studio," the words could apply to Gloria Swanson herself, as she was the studio's top star for 6 years running. And what's interesting too about that is, unlike her character of Norma Desmond, and shout out to the Blu-ray that I have of this movie, they had a bunch of behind the scenes about the making of and just all this stuff. And they had real footage of Gloria Swanson saying, I was still constantly working. I was in television, movies, and all that. It wasn't like she was completely, away from the world, kind of like how Norma was, who was kind of stuck in her head, almost a hypochondriac, agoraphobic. So I thought that was pretty interesting that Gloria Swanson actually did work at Paramount, was actually a popular actress and whatnot. In fact, not this season, but later next season, I'll be reviewing a Gloria Swanson film just to kind of see what she was like as an actress outside of this movie. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But now with that, let's get into my thoughts on the plot. All right, so the plot, I gave it a 5 out of 5. I really love this story. I think it's very fascinating and interesting. And it shows, I love that it's noir in the sense we see the end from the beginning. We already know the Joe character dies, but we have no idea what happened, what got to that point. We're just thrown into it. And so then now we go back in time and see how it all came together. I've always liked that. I definitely think it can be overused, though. But in this case, it works very, very well. Because we're like, who the heck is Norma Desmond? Who the heck is this guy? And what happened that led to his death and all that. And it's pretty interesting. I also love, too, that Billy Wilder was bold enough to make this movie. Because this movie, it's called A Hollywood Story, and it makes you wonder how many cases are like Norma Desmond. Once a huge, mega superstar, and then now kind of forgotten, just, stuck at home all day, and nobody cares anymore. And just to how kind of sinister and horrible Hollywood really is as a studio, as an industry. I mean, this movie came out in 1950, right? You would see something like this nowadays, but this is back in 1950, 75 years ago. That's pretty crazy that he was willing to do a story like this. And I love it. I love every aspect of it. And I also love, too, it's kind of secretly a love letter to the silent era. Because the way Norma Desmond acts and moves around and the expressions and whatnot is very much like a silent actress and whatnot. And I really appreciated that. And the fact, too, that they got real footage from some of Gloria Swanson's movies. The fact they got Cecil B. DeMille, who was one of her directors in this movie, too. Just all of that. It's almost a meta film and almost a mirror pointing back at Hollywood, saying, this is what fame does to people, especially when their star is no longer shining. So I think it's very, very fascinating. And I'll get into more my thoughts on that later on. But yeah, I thought it's a great story, very engaging, very fascinating. Now, let me get into my thoughts on the acting, on something I don't love about the story. So the acting, I gave it a 4 out of 5. And the 4 is for Gloria Swanson, for Eric von Stroheim, for Nancy Olsen. I think they're all fantastic. I don't like William Holden. I don't know what it is. I feel like I should like him. I like his style of acting. I like the dialogue he has. And it's very witty and whatnot. It's just, I always found him to be kind of bland and like he talks and sounds the same. Now, you can apply that to any other actor, but at least for me, he just doesn't have that swagger. He doesn't have what I want in an actor like this. He just seems kind of bland to me. I've just have never really liked him. And he's pretty much the main character other than Norma. I mean, he's narrating, So, I don't know. I call him William Boredom instead of William Holden. I'm just not the biggest fan of his delivery. And especially when you have him next to Gloria Swanson. Gloria Swanson is fantastic. She is definitely emulating a silent actress. You could tell for sure. She, how much of it is reality, how much of it is her acting, I don't know. But I was very fascinated and very connected with her. I think she was the best overall. And then von Stroheim, I mentioned he was great. It's very fascinating kind of how similar it is too. I mean, he was a real film director. And I watched the behind the scenes about this movie, and Nancy Olson, who plays, she's in the bottom left there. I can't remember her character's name, but she's kind of a love interest for William Holden's character, Joe. She talked about how it was fascinating seeing Erich von Stroheim, who was so used to being behind the camera, just kind of looking over, leaning over, seeing what's going on. He still loved filmmaking, even, was it 20 years, 30 years since he had been on a film set? It might have been less. I don't know a whole lot about his acting or other filmography, but I know for sure, like, he was huge in the 20s and 30s. And I reviewed one of his films, not The Wedding March, but the other one. He's wearing a monocle. It's escaping me. I can't remember the title, but I wasn't the biggest fan. But that's beside the point. He does a fantastic job, too, as kind of an eerie butler and, former director, too. Very interesting. And then Nancy Olson, I thought she was great. She kind of reminded me of a lot of, other actresses in this era, kind of showing, would you call it a dichotomy? Just what Joe's going through, seeing Norma Desmond holding on to the past, and then Nancy Olson's character, holding on to the future, paving her way forward. And he's kind of stuck in between the two, can't really figure out. Obviously, he wants to go forward, right? But Norma Desmond finds a way to hook him in, too. It's very interesting. But, yeah, William Holden brings it down for me, but it's still great cast and great acting outside of him. All right, let's move on to the directing. Okay, so the directing, I give it a 5 out of 5. I think Billy Wilder does a fantastic job here. This might be my second favorite film from him. Because when I've seen it before, by the way, I didn't like it as much as I did this time around, which is very interesting. Normally I give it a 4, but I actually really liked it this time. Even if William Holden kind of brings it down for me, I think Billy Wilder does a great job here. Again, showing a mirror and pointing it at Hollywood, saying, "Look what we do to these people." Is what we're doing really worth it? Now, this is definitely a cartoon, exaggeration where she literally kills a guy, but this is what fame does. So I love that, and I love how bold he was for making a movie like this. Especially, it was 1950. It's not like this is the 70s or a deconstructed era. This is 1950. So pretty fascinating. Yeah, that's why I gave it a 4 out of 5, the directing. All right, let's move on to cinematography and special effects. 5 out of 5. I thought they did fantastic here. Especially this scene right here is probably my favorite, where she finally kind of snaps and kills Joe, and then she kind of feels like she's back on the movie set, right? And these are just the reporters who are like, "Oh yeah, come at the camera, Miss Desmond," and very fascinating. And just the way she starts moving around and acting is very German expressionist, very silent era, and I love it. It works very well. And I don't know if this was the intention or not, but I love that the camera kind of fades out as she gets closer and closer. I thought it was a good visual metaphor for her star fading out. That was pretty interesting. I also think the movie is a love letter to the silent era, even with the camera work. You could tell for sure that Billy Wilder was still reminiscent of that era. He got his start in film during that era of film. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And, what I also love is that, again, this film kind of is almost a documentary in a way, because it shows what does happen to people once they're famous and then their star, figuratively and literally, fades out. For sure, Norma Desmond is not a good person. She kills Joe, she loses her mind, right? She's definitely not a great person. But it also goes to show, this is what fame does to people. Is it really a great thing that we have fame in the way we do? And it makes me wonder too, even nowadays, and I think a lot of people can learn from this movie. Are there people today, are there influencers, YouTube, TikTok, whatever it is, are there people today who 10 years from now are going to be like Norma Desmond? Are we going to have thousands, tens of thousands of Norma Desmond in 10 to 20 years from now? I'm kind of scared of that. This movie shows how kind of devastating that could be. I mean, in Norma's case, she's kind of a homebody. She's kind of agoraphobic, doesn't really like to go outside. And she's delusional too. She still thinks she's very famous. She still thinks that people love her and she's this huge star when she's not. And again, fame is a strange and fickle thing because one moment you're on top of the world, the next moment nobody cares anymore. And there's so many examples today of that happening on social media. I think of like some like TikTok people or even Vine when that was a thing. There's so many people like that. I wonder what happened to them. And maybe they end up like Norma Desmond. They've gone crazy. Fame is a very strange thing. And this film shows kind of the dangers of it. And I really, really appreciate it. And that's why I gave the cinematography a 5 out of 5. All right, let's talk about the music. So the music I liked. I think it sets the tone very well. It's very eerie, very noir. It's a little forgettable though, but I think the best use of music is at the end when, we all kind of see, oh, she's gone crazy, moving towards the camera and all that. That's the best use of the music in the movie. Other than that though, to me, it's not a very memorable score. And maybe if I watch it more times, it will be, but it kind of blends in. What stands out more to me is the camera work, the acting, all that. That stands out more to me than the music does. So that's why I gave it a 4. All right, so overall, my score is a 4.6 out of 5, which I'm rounding to a 5 out of 5. Again, this is going to be a higher score than when I originally reviewed it on my other channel a few years ago. So it's pretty interesting how times changed. And with that makes my critical score a 92%. And let me break down my score for that. There's no graphic language. And in regards to violence, there's some shooting, fighting. There's an attempted suicide, but it's off camera, so nothing gruesome, anything like that. We just see her wearing bandages after it. There's nudity. There isn't any nudity or sexual content, excuse me. Just some kissing and kind of a strange romance. We don't know how old Joe is in the movie, but I looked up William Holden, and he was about 31, 32 when this movie was made. And then Gloria Swanson was 50, so pretty big age gap there. So relationship-wise, it's strange because she almost treats him like a kid, but then also is in love with him, kind of like a Rudolph Valentino. She keeps calling him that, essentially. It's a very strange relationship. All right, in regards to political bias, there isn't any. I guess calling out Hollywood like that is inherently political, but I wouldn't call that left or right or anything like that. I think that's nothing to do with those kind of politics. It's definitely more workplace politics. All right, family friendly. I would say, yeah. I don't think kids would appreciate it as much, especially if they've never seen a silent movie or older movies. I think this is better for audiences who can understand the dialogue, because the dialogue is very necessary to understand in this movie. Ironically, talking about a silent actress, right? It's not like visually stimulating or anything like that. A lot of it is with the dialogue and the acting. And I don't think kids would fully appreciate it the way adults would. And it's not adult in any stretch of the imagination. I just think kids wouldn't appreciate it or understand it as much, especially if they're not familiar with silent films or older films in general. Okay, so in regards to entertainment value, I thought it was very entertaining. I was very engaged with the story, but it's definitely not a story or a film you could watch all the time. It's very tragic, tragic that Norma Desmond, right, this once great star, now nobody cares or knows about, and just how she's living in delusion and how people are feeding into that delusion. And then too, she snaps and kills someone, like that's pretty crazy and tragic. or the character of Joe, even though I don't really like William Holden, I think it's tragic too that he was also just trying to make it big in Hollywood and just never could. And then he gets killed, you know. And that's not a spoiler. That's the beginning of the film, right? But, you know, it's not a movie you're going to want to watch all the time. I think it's pretty depressing, honestly. But, yeah, I think it's a very entertaining film. All right, so with all of that, would I recommend this movie? Yes, I would, especially if you're a fan of the silent era. This movie is a love letter to the silent era. It's, you know, got a great cast. There's some cameos in it of people from the silent era, like Buster Keaton and a couple other actors and actresses. I don't remember their names, but one of them, he plays Mr. Gower in It's a Wonderful Life. He also played Jesus Christ in King of Kings from Cecil B. DeMille from the 20s. So he's a pretty big star then, but it's very interesting seeing that. So if you're really into silent era, you're going to appreciate it. If you want to see the dangers of fame or working in Hollywood, this movie's for you. Even nowadays, this movie 100% applies. Or if you're just curious about what it's like in Hollywood in general, this movie's for you. Or if you want a good character study on what fame can do to people, whether that's through Hollywood or social media, all these different methods we have. This is what fame can do to people. Or if you just want a good mystery, because we don't know how he dies. At the beginning of the movie, we're like, who the heck is Norma Desmond? How did this guy die? What happened? And then it kind of unfolds as we go along. So I say a lot of people would appreciate and I think get into this movie. But anyways, those are my thoughts overall on Sunset Boulevard from 1950. You can tell this is one of my favorite movies. I really love it. I got it on Blu-ray, and hopefully soon they'll do a 4K release of it. This year's the 75th anniversary. I haven't seen or heard any news about them doing that, so we'll see. But yeah, anyways, those are my thoughts overall, and thank you so much. This has been Really Old Movies. I'm your host, Harrison Scullin. Take care.